This is the Marketing Podcast Network.
Welcome to Uncorking a Story, the podcast that introduces you to the rich world of storytellers who share their personal journeys, creative processes, and the stories behind their stories, one conversation at a time. I'm your host, Mike Carlin, and I'm thrilled to be part of your writing journey. If you're an aspiring writer, a literary enthusiast, or simply someone who believes in the transformative power of words, you've come to the right place. Every week, we'll pop the cork on the world of successful storytellers and give you a healthy pour of inspiration, insight, and empowerment. My mission is to help writers like you realize your full potential through the transformative and therapeutic power of writing. Whether you're just starting your literary voyage or looking to refine your craft, I'm here to provide you with the knowledge, inspiration, and encouragement you need to embark on your own storytelling adventure. So, are you ready to uncork your story and let your creativity flow? Uncorking a Story is about to begin. Sit back, relax, and let the transformative magic of storytelling whisk you away. Welcome to Uncorking a Story. Well, hey now, and welcome back to another exciting episode of Uncorking a Story. I'm Mike Carlin, and I'm thrilled to have you join me on another exciting episode. I want to remind you to please follow Uncorking a Story on all social media platforms, including Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. You can find us at all of those locations at Uncorking a Story. And a quick note and plug for YouTube, that platform has been a great growth vehicle for the show, especially since we've improved the video quality of our program. It's also become a very fun way for me to interact with my audience. So please subscribe to our YouTube channel by searching for Uncorking a Story on YouTube and hitting subscribe. And for you audio listeners out there, please subscribe, rate, and review Uncorking a Story wherever you get your podcasts. Okay, today's guest is Peggy Townsend, and she's a journalist by trade who pivoted to writing fiction after leaving her job following an acquisition of her newspaper. And if there's one lesson that stands out from this conversation that I really want you to pay attention to, it's the power of persistence. Peggy's full-time career started after her internship at a local newspaper ended, and she decided just to keep showing up for work, even though that her internship was over. She eventually started to get paid again, and man, isn't that a lesson in persistence? But as writers, persistence is right up there with creativity and curiosity when it comes to writing. As a writer, you should be writing something every single day. And it doesn't have to be a set number of words. Like you don't have to write 5,000 words a day or anything like that. But really, doing the reps and writing every day is the only way to find and refine your voice as a writer or as an author and practice the craft. But here's the thing, persistence isn't just for finishing a manuscript. You've got to be persistent when trying to get it published. That means being persistent with finding an agent. And I personally know how discouraging it can be to query agents because, let's face it, most of our query letters, if they do get answered by a form letter. And by the way, why are those form letters so uncreative? I mean, you think, given what they do for a living, they could put a little something interesting in there. But for the most part, you're getting those form letters back. And you got to keep going. I could wallpaper my office with rejection letters or thank you but no thank you letters from agents. But you've got to be persistent. It took me a while to find an agent. And I learned a lesson in college, and it was from my fraternity, and not that I talk about it that often, but there was a line that I heard 30 years ago, which is a pearl of great price isn't obtained for us simply by asking for it. So you really got to keep at it. Be persistent. Learn from the feedback you're getting from agents if you are getting feedback. Learn from feedback you're getting from editors or people who are giving you feedback on your work, learn from your mistakes, and then, of course, forge a path forward. It won't happen overnight. Nothing happens overnight for anybody. And overnight might mean 6 months. It takes a long time to make it as a writer and an author, but just be persistent, keep at it, have the right attitude. It'll eventually happen. My goal for Uncorking a Story is to continually introduce you to successful authors who have made a living through words. And today's lesson, inspired by Peggy Townsend, is to embrace persistence. And now, without further interruptions from yours truly, let's uncork Peggy Townsend's story. Peggy Townsend is an award-winning journalist who has panhandled with street kids, taken to the skies with pararescuers, and once chased an escaped murderer through a graveyard at midnight. Her first mystery, See Her Run, was listed as one of the 13 thrillers to keep you up at night by Kirkus Reviews. Her second book, The Thin Edge, was called an outstanding novel by the Associated Press, and she joins me today on Uncorking a Story to discuss her career and latest book, The Beautiful and the Wild. Welcome to Uncorking a Story, Peggy.
Thank you, Mike. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm excited to have you here, Peggy, and I'm curious, where does your story as an author begin?
Well, I think I'll trace it. I'm a journalist, so I've been a newspaper reporter for a long time. But I think my creative writing career began at the Poynter Institute in Florida. I went there for a nonfiction narrative week, and James McBride, the author of the Heaven and Earth Grocery Store, was there as our teacher, guest lecturer. And I swear he changed the way I looked at writing. He just opened my eyes to a whole new way of telling a story. And I used that to move from journalism into writing novels. He just, talked about digging deeply into people's emotions, landscape as character, concentrating on details and letting them tell the story. So he was shaped my writing career very much.
When did you decide to become a journalist? When in your life did that light bulb go off in your head and said, you know what I want to do with my life? I want to do something with words, and it's going to be journalism. How old were you?
Well, this is one of those weird things. I'm one of those weird people that I think I was in seventh grade, and I love to write. I love to read, and I thought, oh, I want to be a writer. But then I kept reading about all these writers that died poor, and I didn't want to die poor, live in a hovel. And I thought, well, what can you do and write and make some money? So I decided to become a journalist, not knowing that you don't make a lot of money being a journalist, but you aren't living in a hovel either. So that's how I decided to be a journalist.
Yeah, you can write many manuscripts and books, but if you don't sell one of them, and even when you do, it's not like they're backing up a Brinks truck to your to your house.
Yeah, exactly.
Tell me about breaking into the field of journalism when you did, because I know it's a pretty competitive industry. How did you manage to break in and make a career for yourself there?
Well, this is kind of a funny story. So out of college, I got an internship at a newspaper, and I knew the day that I was supposed to leave, and nobody said anything. So I just came to work again the next day, and I just stayed. And then I got a paycheck, and I figured, oh, I must have been hired. And I also just worked my ass off too. Like, I didn't just sit there and pretend to be a journalist. Like, I was out there working my ass off. Any story they wanted me to cover, I was covering it, and I did some enterprise stuff on my own. It was I guess it was persistence, which is also the trait that a novelist needs too. But I just fell in love with journalism and telling a story and giving voice to the voiceless. I really saw that as an important part of what I did.
So where was that gig? And I have a follow-up question for you on this, but where was that first job?
Well, it's actually here in Santa Cruz where I live. I worked at the local newspaper, and I had this wonderful mentor, this woman who worked at a rival newspaper, and we both were covering cops in courts, which is what we called it at the time. And she was just this tough as nails, cursing, cigarette smoking, chain smoking woman who I think she kind of did it to keep me from scooping her for anything, but she also taught me tons about what it's like to be a journalist. So
I think it's so important to have mentors in life, and this one really does sound like a character, but I'm curious, like you're supposed to, not show up for work one day. You keep showing up. Does the managing editor, does anyone just say, what is she still doing here? Or just kind of go with the flow and they started paying you? That to me, that's amazing.
It is kind of amazing. You have to, I guess I could say it now but the editor was alcoholic, basically. And so I guess maybe he thought he'd hired me and just never said anything and put in the request for a paycheck. And but I also, my city editor really liked me too. And so he would have said, "You're out of here," if he thought I didn't deserve to be there. So I'm never quite sure exactly how it happened. I was kind of afraid to go in and say, I never really got formally hired here. I just kept collecting my checks.
Well, I want to, we're going to talk about the book, I promise, but I want to dig in just a little bit more to some of the stuff I read in your bio. And, pararescuers, panhandling with street kids, escaping a murderer through a graveyard. I mean, maybe out of those three, I'm probably most interested in escaping the murderer in the graveyard. But what was that all about?
Well, so journalism you don't turn it off. When you go home at night, it's one of those professions that you're always in it. And so sometimes the cops would just drop by my house and ask if I wanted to ride along. And so it was kind of testament to my boring life that I would say, "Oh yeah, sure, I'll go ride along. Let's see what's going on." And so this night, there was a police officer, and I won't name his name, but the guy had a second sense. Like he was spooky how he knew things were going on. So we're going along, and it came over the radio that a suspected serial killer named Billy Mansfield had escaped from jail with one other inmate. And the reports had a woman had seen these two guys in the downtown area, but the cop I was with said, "Nuh-uh, that's not where they're going." So we drove up a different direction. There's a river near the jail. And we drove up and we parked in this graveyard, and we ran across the graveyard and started running up the side trail of this river looking for the guy. It was night. He had a gun. I had a flashlight. And so we're walking along this path. And it was just spooky as heck. Both of us were just like on high alert. And so we followed through the brush up this river until I guess it was about an hour later, we got a call that they had a command center formed. So we had to come back because they were going to do a formal thing with dogs and everything. And sure enough, I guess it was about 6-7 hours later, they found the serial killer up the trail where we had been hiding in a log jam. So we were on his path,
Wow.
But we just didn't quite get to him.
The the name Billy Mansfield, I'll be honest, does not sound very threatening. But I guess you can't really judge a serial killer by their name.
That's very correct. So the weird thing about Billy Mansfield is that Billy Mansfield was spookily handsome. Like he had those husky blue kind of eyes and this gorgeous brown hair and super handsome. And he was suspected of killing a woman he met at a bar in our town. But the cops later found, I think it was 4 or 5 women's bodies buried in the junkyard that his family owned in Florida. And so he was this kind of spooky combination of, like, you'd look at him and you'd think, like he looked like a model or something. And yet it hid this really dark interior. He was not a very nice person.
Yeah. I mean, what is it about good looking serial killers? I mean, that's just not fair. What I mean?
In my book, I could hope you can judge the book by its cover, but in real life, you can't judge a book by its cover.
Well, that's a great segue to your book. What can you share with us about?
Accidental, by the way. I didn't mean to jump in.
Oh, no. This is great. We're gonna you just open the door and I'm gonna walk through it. So, what can you share with us about The Beautiful and the Wild?
Well, it's not a chase a serial killer through the Alaskan wilderness kind of story. It's more domestic suspense. My main character, her name is Liv Russo, and she is coping and mourning the fact that her husband has died by suicide when she gets this cryptic text that suggests that he might be alive and living in Alaska. And, she has nothing left to lose. She has a job she doesn't like. Can't pay the rent. She has a young son. who's developmentally delayed, and she decides to head north to see if she can find her husband. And what she finds is that he has a second family, and he wants her to join this group that he started, this kind of not a love triangle, but this new way of living in the woods. And so the whole thing is that winter's coming, they're facing starvation, things are going south, jealousy is rampant, and she needs to get out of there with her son. And so that's the kind of the core of the story.
How did this story come to you? It sounds fascinating, and I'm just like putting myself in this brief, description that you just read in her shoes, and it certainly feels like a page turner. But how did this idea come to you?
Well, a couple of reasons. One, as a journalist, I dealt with a lot of secrets, both ones that people tried to conceal and then ones that people revealed to me. But the idea came, we have a little cabin up in near Lake Tahoe. And by little cabin, I mean it's really a cabin. It's not a house. So I was stacking a cord of firewood, and listening to podcasts, right? And this podcast came on about a ex-Marine named Billy Sipple, who lived in San Francisco and thwarted the attempted assassination of Gerald Ford. And he became this hero. Television, newspaper, everybody was covering him, and he was, in the news. And a newspaper and a politician decided to out him as gay because at that time they wanted to say, oh, here's a hero and look, he's gay, because at the times there was a lot of discrimination. And so they outed him, and his family didn't know he was gay, and other people didn't know he was gay. And Billy ended up dying, according to the podcast, a lonely, bitter man living in the Tenderloin in San Francisco, which is not a great place. And I was struck by that idea that you could do something so good and so heroic, and it would reveal one of your deepest secrets. And what would that be like? So my characters, both Liv and her husband, Mark, have secrets that they are trying to keep hidden. And so that idea sparked the whole basis for the book, which is about how our secrets can be so harmful to us.
Yeah, it's just a few things I love about that. Number one, kind of where you are, you're listening to a podcast, you're at your cabin in the woods, you're stacking firewood. I mean, this is, got all the makings of a great backstory. Also love another Billy. I mean, this is the second Billy we've talked about on the show today. But this notion of secrets, because that's really something, and I think this is what really makes a great story or a story relatable, is that we all have secrets, right? We all hide some things about ourselves, and the more, like, as a writer, you can like kind of weave in things that we all have in common, the more relatable I think it is. Now, of course, this is probably an extreme example. Having a secret of another family or whatever your protagonist's secret is, we won't reveal it, but it is one of those things that like it's like part of our shared human experience, which I think is what separates good stories from great stories, maybe.
Yeah. Actually, here's an interesting little factoid. I did a bunch of research on secrets, and there is actually, people have looked into secrets, and the average person has 13 secrets, 5 of which they've never told anybody else. So you can think about what's your 5. But the other part of the research that was super interesting to me was that secrets weren't harmful because you had to keep your story straight, and the things you've told everybody. Secrets are harmful because you think about them all the time. They'll pop up like before you go to bed, or when you're watching a show on television and it kind of sparks the memory of your secret. Secrets are bad because you have to live with your secrets.
Yeah, and you can, depending on your belief system, you can manifest some pretty bad things if you're constantly thinking about your secret. It's almost like you can attract some negative things into your life because of the secrets that you're holding.
Correct. Correct. They bring feelings of shame, and then that kind of opens the door to other shame. And shame is a really powerful and destructive emotion. Um,
Yeah.
and so,
Yeah.
yeah, that's kind of why I wanted to explore that idea in this book.
And I think that's maybe part of the reason why we feel so much better when we let our secrets go, or when we can admit to something, and tell the truth about something, or confess something. You put in whatever word you want to put in there, but there is a healing that comes to us when we're able to finally shed this big secret that we've been carrying around. And sometimes they get exposed. Sometimes our hands are forced, right, to
Right.
divulge these things, and sometimes it's not. And I just think in my own life, when I've finally shared something that I've been keeping from other people, or even keeping from myself, to be honest, sometimes you do feel better. There is like a little healing that happens there.
Yeah, that's correct. And research showed exactly that once you told a trusted person or someone that you knew wouldn't be judgmental, that burden of the secret lifted. And the interesting thing is that as a journalist, sometimes I was that person that they told their secret to. I remember an especially poignant time for me when I was doing a story about abuse by a Catholic priest in our area. And this was before the whole Boston Globe thing. It was just kind of starting to go. And this, just 6'4", handsome, tough law enforcement officer came to me and told me that he had been molested by this priest. And he talked about it, and just the burden of that secret I could just see written all over him. And we talked about it. We had a couple sessions, and I said, I really understand your story. I want to look into it, but I need someone else. I can't just have one person. And he said, well, here's the name of another altar boy that you might want to call. And so I called this man, this blue collar, salt of the earth kind of guy. And I just started talking to him. And over the phone, he told me that he had been molested, that this priest had come into his house for dinner with his family, and he had been sick, and the priest had come in his bedroom and molested him. And I was the first person he'd ever told that to. He hadn't told his wife, he hadn't told his friends. No one knew it. And the privilege of hearing that secret, of hearing his story, um, was so powerful for me. And I actually went on to do a story about this priest who had been moved from parish to parish to parish because he'd been, um, you know, been doing inappropriate things with altar boys.
Yeah,
He was a horrible, horrible man.
it's such a criminal thing. And of course, not just limited to the Catholic priest, but in so many people in positions of power do stuff like that. But I imagine for this second man you're talking about, him being able to share that with you, I imagine like having kept that secret for so long, um, that must have impacted his life somehow in terms of his personal relationships. I mean, I have to imagine, and maybe, and this is way off topic here, but once he divulged that to you, did anything change about his life?
I don't know specifically, but eventually he came out and let me use his name in the story. So
Yep.
yeah, I think I would guess that it was a healing thing for him to be able to do that. Likewise, the officer that first approached me to tell me that story. So
Yeah.
yeah, so yeah, secrets are such a big part of our life, and they can be so harmful.
I'm curious as to how you made the pivot from journalism to writing fiction, and it sounds like something that was paramount for you was going down to Florida and taking this seminar. Tell me a little bit more about kind of what was happening in your life when you decided to pivot, or make a change.
Yeah, so as happens to a lot of newspapers, it got bought by this horrible company, and And I was just sitting there, and basically, the memo came down. We had to have a certain number of stories every day, and they just had to be good enough. They didn't have to be great. They just had to be good enough. And I just thought, there's no way I'm doing journalism good enough, because I really believe so strongly in the fourth estate and the need for, a watchdog. And so I quit. I walked away. I also, the interesting thing is, I'd read the book Into the Wild right about the same time, and I saw the movie, and I thought to myself, when had I stopped taking leaps of faith? When had I just said, I'm going to go into the unknown because I want to see what's there? And so I quit. And it was wonderful. And I did some work for the university here, UC Santa Cruz, some journalism work. But then I started writing fiction because why not? It's not something I knew how to do. So I started doing it.
When you quit, were you still working for that same paper, that same local paper in Santa Cruz?
I was.
I can, I'm just imagining like sitting down with HR or the new bosses, and Peggy, you walk in, you say, you know what, my time has come. I'm going on to something else, and they look through their files and they realize we never hired you in the first place.
I never thought of that.
To me, that would be such a funny moment. Like, wait a minute, we don't even have a record of offering you the job.
I wonder if they did that. I don't know, but yeah. So
now you're kind of off. You're starting to write fiction. What was like going through your mind? I mean, your safety net in terms of regular employment is not there anymore, and now you're into the wild, right? I mean, you are kind of going into a little bit of uncharted territory. Tell me, how did you feel during that time?
I felt really good. I felt like I made the right decision. I felt like I didn't compromise my beliefs about journalism. So I felt really good about it. And, a couple lucky things have happened. My husband and I we did kind of flipping houses kind of thing. He was a school teacher and I was a journalist. And so we had this outside job of, fixing up houses and selling them. And not a lot. We weren't big flippers, but it just gave us enough of a cushion that we could live, and we were fine. He had retired from teaching, so we had that income. So we weren't rich, but we didn't need a lot. So I was excited by the possibilities.
Yeah,
I wasn't afraid.
I want to learn a little bit more about this seminar you took. How did you find it? And, what do you think you got out of it?
Well, Poynter is really big in the journalism world. And so I believe a friend told me about about this narrative nonfiction. And so I applied, and, it's a fairly rigorous process to get accepted. And so I was accepted and I went. And like I said, it was life-changing. The teachers there were amazing. James McBride was incredible. We did things like this is super interesting for writers. So we had to, they gave us a set of facts and we had to write a news story, like a 9 or 10-inch news story based on these facts. So being journalists, we're like Pavlov's dogs. They ring the bell, we all write our story. And then after we wrote the story, they said, okay, now take your story and write a 9-line poem based on that story. And so writing a 9-line poem out of like a 10-inch story taught me so much about the power of certain words. Like you use certain words that have this depth of meaning and before I would just choose like a regular word, but you use these power words to make your writing be more powerful. And so I always think of that when I'm writing, like what word can I use that's more powerful to describe what's going on or emotion that's happening? That's the one thing I felt like was super informative for me. But, just the whole idea of digging deep into a story and noticing details that tell a story. I don't want to go on too long, but I did this story about a young kid whose dad was a farm worker, and his dad wanted him to get out of the fields, and so he's training him to be a boxer. And every morning, the kid would get up, put on a hefty trash bag, and run laps around this block where he lived, where his father stood there with this mug of a plastic trucker's mug of 7-Eleven coffee. And before I would have just talked about the kid running, but the fact that this guy was just had this mug of cheap coffee standing there in the cold watching his son train for his dreams was something I wouldn't have picked up, but I picked up on after the Pointer Institute.
Yeah. It makes it much more interesting, I think, when you're not just talking about somebody running and sweating and what the character is going through, but having this observer who is clearly invested in it, also in a situation where he's in the cold and keeping warm and drinking. I've never had 7-Eleven coffee. Now I've had Wawa coffee many times, but never 7-Eleven. So I don't know how good or how not good it might be. Yeah.
Well, not to be, I do. My husband and I do a lot of road trips, so we've done some 7-Eleven coffee, and believe me, it's kind of battery acid like, but it's cheap, and that's the point. The dad is drinking this cheap coffee so he can buy his kid a pair of boxing gloves, wonderful boxing gloves. So that's kind of the point of it. But yeah, no, not to put down 7-Eleven and people that might like 7-Eleven coffee, but it's not for me.
Yeah. Well, what words of advice would you offer to an aspiring writer? Somebody who is, wanting to make a living with words, and maybe somebody who's trying to write a book right now. What are some words of advice you would give them?
I would, a couple of things, like persistence is the main thing. Just like if you keep going to work, even if you don't know you're hired, you're writing a book, even though you may not think of yourself as a writer, just keep writing, keep at it. Get up every day and sit down at your computer or with a legal pad and a pencil and write. Just write something. And you'll find in there, I believe, at some point, you'll find your voice. And then you'll find your story. And once you have that, then you're able to keep going with that, and to not be afraid of your first draft is going to be crappy. Everybody's is. Maybe some people aren't. Maybe there's amazing people that they don't have crappy first drafts, but that's not me. That's not a lot of the writers I know. So
I mean, I've had crappy third drafts, so.
Yeah, or crappy third drafts. But there you go. It's persistence. So you just keep doing it and find your voice. And then once you have your voice, you're on your way.
And finding your voice, I know it is subjective, but you can't really do it unless you're doing the reps, unless you're putting that work in. You're not going to know, because I think sometimes, and we all do this, musicians do this. They try and emulate their favorite musician. I mean, in the 80s, I can't tell you how many guitar players I listened to that clearly they were emulating Eddie Van Halen in terms of how they were approaching the instrument. But over time, you do develop your own style. And I think, some of us might emulate our favorite writers in terms of tone, in terms of structure. But then, something happens, something takes over, and you find your style, you find your flow, but you can't find it, to your point, without being persistent, without doing the work and putting the reps in.
Yeah, no, 100%, and you can listen to those other voices, read those other words and appreciate them, and maybe even think, well, why does that work? But you got to find your own voice, and it only comes through practice, through muscle, through writing muscle.
The old writing muscle. Well, Peggy, one way I'd like to get to know my guests a little bit more is by asking a couple of pop culture type questions. So I'm curious. Don't worry, it's nothing current, because I wouldn't be able to name anything current. But when you were growing up, I'm curious, Peggy, what were your favorite things to watch on TV? Did you have a go-to program that you liked as a kid?
Well, maybe this is where some of the writer stuff comes. I remember my sister and I used to watch Lassie. And we would sob through every episode. And my parents would come in and they would say, "You can't watch Lassie anymore. It makes you too upset." And we would say, "No, we want to watch Lassie." And so we'd watch it and cry. So that's the one that I remember the most,
Yeah. I
was,
remember I saw it later on, in reruns or whatever. And I always remember, she was a good dog. I mean, she knew when, what was it, Timmy being caught in a well? Like she knew, she knew where to go for help too. So,
yeah. But she was
that's
always in danger, and that made us afraid. And so, but
yeah.
that's a good book, right? A good book makes you feel. So,
Well, there's no story without tension. You got to give somebody a reason to keep watching or to keep reading. And, you have to have a little bit of danger. It's funny. My mother was a huge animal lover. And she would always, like, if there was something that bad that might happen to a dog on screen, like she would just leave the room. I'm like, Mom, the dog's going to be fine.
yeah.
I'm not so sure about Precious from Silence of the Lambs. I don't know if that ever worked out or not, but 9 times out of 10, an author or writer isn't going to do anything bad to an animal because they know that they're just going to get flooded with hate mail. You know, you
100%.
can kill all the people you want, but don't hurt a dog.
Yeah, that's a lesson I learned that I had no idea existed, but apparently it's 100% accurate.
It is a thing. It is a thing. What about music? What did you like listening to?
Oh, I'm pretty eclectic. Are you talking about when I was younger or like
Yeah.
now?
Yeah, when you were younger, and we can talk about now in a minute. But I'm curious, when you were younger,
Yeah.
what was in the old? I'd say the Walkman headphones, but that's dating me. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's a hard question because I was not a big music person. I mean, I like the lyrics, but the songs didn't stick very much. I guess I just like songs that told stories. I love, this is dating me too, but like Eddie Vedder and the Foo Fighters, I just love their stuff, because they told stories.
yeah.
And yeah, so I'd say songs that tell a story.
When you said that, my brain went immediately to Gordon Lightfoot and the Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. I mean, because that is a that is a story song, and now that's going to be stuck in my head for the rest of the day. And I blame you, Peggy.
Oh, I'm so sorry. That is not a good song to have stuck in your head. I apologize. I apologize.
No worries. It was my own brain. You just opened the door, and my brain went to God rest his soul, Gordon Lightfoot. But do you have a favorite place where you like to read?
I do. So at our cabin, outside, there's two pine trees in this kind of little flat area, and I take this foldable chaise lounge that I have, and I just love to sit out there and read. It's like one of my favorite places to read. I can sit there for hours and hours and just be transported, and the wind in the trees and the fresh air. It's just a wonderful spot.
It sounds idyllic. So not just podcasts at the cabin. There's some books there too.
A few, yeah. That's where I write the best because we really don't have any Wi-Fi there, and barely any cell reception. So I've had a couple little mini writing retreats with my writer friends, and I get so much done because there's no Wi-Fi. So, yeah.
Well, you just answered my next question, which is, do you have a favorite place to write? Sounds like it could be this cabin as well.
That's my favorite place to write. But I also write, I just did another podcast where all these people had these great desks that they wrote out. And so my desk I found on the side of the road with a free sign on it. And it was a really cool desk. And so it's in my garage underneath the surfboards and next to the mountain bikes and the washing machine. So that's where I write most of the time. But my favorite is the cabin.
To Santa Cruz, I guess is it by law you have to have at least one surfboard in Santa Cruz, or?
Oh, of course. Yeah. No. You have to have a surfboard and you have to wear flip-flops in November. So.
Well, that sounds good to me. I'm living in the wrong geographical location because we won't have flip-flops until maybe the end of May. We'll see.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we're pretty much flip-flop all year long. So
That would certainly work for me. But my wife, she's one of these change of seasons type people. So, my last question for you is sometimes the most challenging for people to answer. Other people have an easy time with it, which is if you could go back in time and write a letter to the younger Peggy, what kind of words of advice or encouragement would you give your younger self if you had the opportunity to do so?
oh, that is such a good question. I've never thought of that. I guess I would go back and tell myself to have the confidence to to take leaps forward, to have the confidence to step off the edge sometimes. I kind of learned to do that in journalism, like panhandling the street kids and doing some of the stories that I did. But it was always hard, and I always felt like I didn't have that confidence to do it. And I would tell myself to take the leap, take more leaps. So great question.
Well, thank you. But it actually led me to another, which is about empathy. Because, you mentioned panhandling with the street kids, and that certainly is, you joining them, as part of their day and experiencing what they experience. What role does empathy play in writing for you?
I think, gosh, it plays a huge role. I think it's more that I'm able to put myself in a place where someone is. And I don't know if that's empathy or just being willing to step into where someone is at that moment. Like with the street kids, panhandling with them, what I realized is people walked by and didn't even see this kid. Here's this 13-year-old kid on his own. People walked by, not a word, not a smile, not an acknowledgement. And I just felt myself move into his world where he was invisible, and not only invisible, but shunned. And so I think if that's empathy or just being able to step into someone's shoes to tell their story, then yeah, I think that is important.
Yeah, because I bet you couldn't tell that story as effectively without having done that exercise, without feeling what it's like to be invisible or to be shunned. That's my assumption anyway. And my mother told me always never to assume, but that's my assumption.
No, it was 100%. It made the story come real. So.
Well, Peggy, where can people connect with you if they wanted to learn more about Peggy Townsend? Do you have a website, or do you have any social media that you're somewhat active on?
I have a website, but I wouldn't go there. I think best is my Instagram, Peggy Townsend Writer. I'm there a lot, and I kind of post stuff. What's my life like, and what I'm doing, and other writers that I admire, and books that I'm reading. So I think that's the best place to go.
Well, I will be sure to put that in the show notes, as well as links to where people can buy The Beautiful and the Wild. Peggy, thank you so much for stopping by Uncorking a Story and letting me uncork yours.
Thank you so much. This was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. You asked some great questions. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Uncorking a Story. If you'd like more information about today's guest or to find out more about Mike, go to uncorkingastory.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in every week to hear Mike Carlin uncork a new story.